Video 21, Part 5b of 25, Inputs to the Define Scope Process. The purpose of this video is to develop a WBS to present the inputs to the Define Scope process. The Define Scope process is the third process in the Project Scope Management knowledge area and is related to the Planning Process group. Please click the like button. Subscribe to my channel and share with others. Thank you. The first input to the Define Scope process is the project charter info. Now one question arises: how important is the input of project charter to the Define Scope process? Here's why project charter is important. 1. Provides high-level project information. The project charter contains the project's purpose, objectives, and high-level requirements, which serve as the foundation for defining detailed scope. The project charter helps ensure alignment with business needs and stakeholder expectations. 2. Defines initial boundaries and deliverables. The project charter outlines key deliverables, assumptions, and constraints, which guide the team in developing a more detailed scope statement. Without the charter, the scope definition might lack direction or strategic alignment. 3. Authorizes the project manager to define scope. The project charter formally authorizes the project and gives the project manager the authority to elicit detailed requirements and define scope. Without this, scope definition may lack legitimacy. 4. Links to stakeholder expectations. Since the project charter includes stakeholder influences and high-level expectations, it helps prevent scope creep by ensuring detailed scope aligns with initial agreements. How can poor project charter analysis harm the Define Scope process? Poor analysis of the project charter can significantly harm the Define Scope process, leading to project inefficiencies, misalignment, and even failure. Here we can see how the Define process can be harmed by a poor project charter analysis. 1. Unclear or misunderstood project objectives. If the project charter's high-level goals are not properly analyzed, the team may define a scope that doesn't align with business needs. As a result, we may have wasted effort, rework, or delivering a product that doesn't meet stakeholder expectations. 2. Incomplete or missing deliverables. The project charter lists key deliverables. If these are overlooked, the scope may exclude critical components. As a result, we may have scope gaps, missed requirements, and potential project failure due to incomplete outputs. 3. Unidentified assumptions and constraints. Poor analysis may miss assumptions, such as resource availability, or constraints, such as budget limits, leading to unrealistic scope definitions. As a result, we may have scope creep, budget overruns, or schedule delays when unaccounted for limitations arise. 4. Stakeholder misalignment and scope creep. If the charter's stakeholder expectations are ignored, the defined scope may not satisfy key parties. As a result, we may have disputes, change requests, and uncontrolled scope expansion. 5. Lack of formal authority for scope decisions. The charter authorizes the project manager. If its authority is unclear, scope decisions may lack legitimacy. As a result, we may have conflicts over scope changes, delays in approvals, or weak governance. 6. Poor risk and dependency awareness. The charter often highlights high-level risks and dependencies. Ignoring these can lead to an overly optimistic or unfeasible scope. As a result, we may have unexpected roadblocks, delays, or project derailment. In conclusion, the project charter is essential to the Define Scope process because it provides the starting point for detailed scope development. Without it, The project may suffer from unclear boundaries, misalignment with business goals, or uncontrolled scope changes. The second input to the defined scope process is the project management plan info. The project management plan is a critical input to the defined scope process in project management. The key contributions of the project management plan to defined scope are presented now. 1. Provides foundational guidance. The project management plan includes subsidiary plans like the scope management plan, which outlines how scope will be defined, validated, and controlled. The requirements management plan, if included, helps ensure stakeholder needs are properly translated into project scope. 2. Defines constraints and assumptions. The project management plan documents high-level constraints, such as budget, time, and resources, and assumptions that shape the project scope. These help prevent scope creep by setting boundaries early. 3. Aligns with other knowledge areas. The schedule, cost, risk, and quality management plans influence scope decisions, as a tight schedule can limit scope. The stakeholder engagement plan ensures key stakeholders are consulted during scope definition. 4. References initial scope baseline, if available. If an early version of the scope statement or work breakdown structure exists, it guides refinement in defined scope. How can poor project management plan analysis harm the defined scope process? Poor analysis of the project management plan can severely undermine the defined scope process, leading to cascading issues throughout the project. Here's how a poor analysis of the project management plan can harm the defined scope process. 1. Unclear or misaligned scope definition. If the scope management plan, a project management plan component, isn't properly analyzed, the team may lack clear guidelines for defining scope, resulting in vague or contradictory deliverables. As an impact, stakeholders may have mismatched expectations, leading to disputes or rework later. 2. Ignored constraints and assumptions. A poor analysis of the project management plan's constraints, such as budget and time, or assumptions can lead to unrealistic scope inclusions. As an example, if the budget constraint isn't considered, the scope may include unaffordable features, causing cost overruns. 3. Scope creep due to weak baselines. If the project management plan's scope baseline, such as preliminary WBS or scope statement, isn't reviewed, the team might miss critical exclusions or dependencies. As an impact, uncontrolled additions to scope can derail schedules and budgets. 4. Misalignment with other knowledge areas. Failing to analyze the schedule, cost, or risk management plans in the PMP can lead to scope definitions that clash with timelines or resource limits. As an example, defining a broad scope without checking the schedule plan may cause unrealistic deadlines and burnout. 5. Stakeholder conflicts from poor engagement. Neglecting the stakeholder engagement plan, a part of the project management plan, may result in excluding key stakeholders during scope discussions. As an impact, late-stage objections or demands for changes, such as, "This wasn't what we agreed." 6. Inadequate risk preparation. If the risk management plan isn't analyzed, potential scope-related risks, such as regulatory changes, may be overlooked. As an impact, unexpected risks can force costly scope adjustments mid-project. In conclusion, as a result of the project management plan's contribution to scope definition, we have: first, a well-defined project scope statement that aligns with overall project objectives. Second, clear deliverables, exclusions, and acceptance criteria to prevent misunderstandings later. It's very important to say that the project management plan is essential to define scope because it ensures the scope is realistic, aligned with stakeholder expectations, and integrated with other project constraints. Without the project management plan, scope definition could be inconsistent, leading to rework or disputes. A poor project management plan analysis turns defined scope into a guessing game, increasing the likelihood of failure. A rigorous review ensures the scope is realistic, aligned, and achievable. As real-world consequences, we may have, first, project delays. Frequent scope revisions due to poor initial definition. Second, budget overruns. Unplanned work from unclear boundaries. Third, stakeholder dissatisfaction. Deliverables don't match expectations. Fourth, project failure. If scope is unmanageable, the project may collapse. How important is the input of project documents to the defined scope process? The input of project documents is critically important to the defined scope process in project management. This process involves developing a detailed description of the project, product, service, or result, and project documents provide essential information to ensure the scope is well-defined, realistic, and aligned with stakeholder expectations. Key project documents used in defined scope. 1. Project Charter provides the high-level project objectives, boundaries, and initial requirements. These high-level objectives, from the project charter, will be converted into detailed deliverables. 2. Requirements documentation contains detailed stakeholder needs, which are refined into project deliverables. 3. Assumption log helps identify constraints and risks that may impact scope definition. 4. Risk register highlights potential risks that could affect scope clarity or feasibility. It helps to identify assumptions and risks that could lead to scope creep if unaddressed. 5. Stakeholder register ensures all relevant stakeholder expectations and influences are considered. Ensures that the documented requirements and constraints are also considered. 6. Lessons learned from previous projects provides insights to avoid past mistakes in scope definition. How can poor project documents analysis harm the defined scope process? Poor analysis of project documents during the defined scope process can lead to significant issues, including scope creep, misalignment, and project failure. Here's how inadequate document analysis can harm the process. 1. Incomplete or ambiguous scope definition. Missed requirements. If requirements documentation isn't thoroughly analyzed, key deliverables may be omitted. Vague objectives. Poor review of the project charter can result in unclear scope boundaries. Unverified assumptions. Ignoring the assumption log may lead to unrealistic scope expectations. 2. Scope creep and uncontrolled changes. Undocumented stakeholder needs. Weak stakeholder register analysis means some expectations may be overlooked, leading to late additions. Ignored constraints. Failing to review constraints, budget, time, resources in project documents can result in an unfeasible scope. 3. Misalignment and stakeholder conflicts. Conflicting requirements. If requirements documentation isn't properly analyzed, different stakeholders may have opposing expectations. Unaddressed risks. Skipping the risk register means potential threats to scope stability aren't mitigated. 4. Increased rework and wasted resources. Inaccurate deliverables. Poor analysis of lessons learned from past projects may lead to repeating mistakes. Poor change management. Without proper document scrutiny, scope changes later disrupt timelines and budgets. 5. Project delays and cost overruns. Unrealistic deadlines. If historical data from past project docs isn't considered, timelines may be unachievable. Budget misestimations. Incomplete analysis of resource and cost constraints leads to financial overruns. In conclusion, project documents are vital because they provide the foundational details needed to create a clear, agreed-upon project scope statement. Without them, the scope may be poorly defined, leading to misalignment, scope creep, or project failure. Properly leveraging these documents ensures a realistic and controlled scope baseline. The fourth input to the defined scope process is the Enterprise Environmental Factors info. How enterprise environmental factors are used in defined scope. First, in relation to constraints. Enterprise environmental factors may impose limitations, such as budget and regulatory rules, that must be factored into scope. Second, in relation to opportunities, enterprise environmental factors, such as new technologies or market trends, may allow for scope expansion or innovation. Third, in relation to assumptions. Enterprise environmental factors help in forming realistic assumptions about what can be achieved. The impact of enterprise environmental factors on defined scope are: 1. Organizational culture and structure influences how scope is defined, approved, and managed, such as centralized versus decentralized decision-making. 2. Market conditions, external factors like competition, regulations, or industry standards may shape project scope. 3. Government industry standards, compliance requirements, such as legal, safety, and environmental, can constrain or expand scope. 4. Infrastructure and resources, existing systems, tools, and resource availability affect what can realistically be included in scope. 5. Stakeholder expectations, external factors like customer demands or shareholder interests influence scope boundaries. How can a poor enterprise environmental factors analysis harm the defined scope process? A poor or incomplete analysis of enterprise environmental factors can significantly harm the defined scope process, leading to unrealistic, unfeasible, or misaligned project outcomes. Here's how it happens. 1. Unrealistic scope due to ignored constraints. As an example, if regulatory requirements, such as environmental laws and safety standards, are overlooked, the project may later face costly rework or legal penalties. As an impact, we may have that the scope may need sudden adjustments mid-project, causing delays and budget overruns. 2. Misalignment with organizational capabilities. As an example, if the company lacks the necessary technology or skilled workforce, the defined scope might assume capabilities that don't exist. As an impact, we may have that the project could fail due to unattainable deliverables or excessive reliance on external vendors. 3. Stakeholder conflicts and poor buy-in. As an example, ignoring cultural or political dynamics, such as resistance to change in a traditional organization, may lead to a scope that key stakeholders reject. As an impact, we may have that the lack of support may derail project approval or execution. 4. Market misjudgments leading to irrelevant deliverables. As an example, if economic trends or competitor actions are not analyzed, the project scope may deliver outdated or non-competitive solutions. As an impact, we may have that the final product may fail to meet market needs, reducing ROI, the returning of investment. 5. Resource shortages and budget overruns. As an example, failing to assess resource availability, such as supply chain risks and labor shortages, may result in an overly ambitious scope. As an impact, we may have that the project could face bottlenecks, delays, or abrupt descoping. 6. Compliance and legal risks. As an example, if industry standards or government policies are ignored, the project may violate regulations. As an impact, we may have fines, forced scope changes, or even project cancellation. 7. Poor risk management. As an example, not considering geographic or environmental factors, such as weather conditions for construction, could lead to an impractical schedule or scope. As an impact, we may have higher risks of failure, safety issues, or unplanned costs. In conclusion, enterprise environmental factors provide critical context for defining project scope, ensuring it aligns with real-world constraints and opportunities. Properly accounting for these factors ensures a realistic, achievable, and value-driven scope. Ignoring them can lead to unrealistic scope definitions, stakeholder misalignment, or project failure. A weak enterprise environmental factors analysis in defined scope sets the stage for scope creep, stakeholder dissatisfaction, or outright project failure. The fifth input to the defined scope process is the organizational process assets info. How important is the input of organizational process assets to the defined scope process? The impact on scope definition can be seen in, first, in efficiency, because it reduces reinvention by reusing proven frameworks. Second, in accuracy, because it helps avoid scope creep by referencing historical constraints. Last, in alignment, because it ensures compliance with organizational policies. Here's we have the key contributions of organizational process assets to define scope. 1. Historical information and lessons learned. Past project documentation, such as scope statements, WBS examples, and change logs, helps avoid past mistakes and leverage best practices. Lessons learned from previous projects guide better scope definition. 2. Templates and standardized processes. Organizations often provide scope statement templates, WBS standards, and guidelines to ensure consistency. Policies for scope approval and change control help in defining boundaries clearly. 3. Enterprise environmental factors and industry standards. Regulatory requirements, market conditions, and organizational culture influence how scope is defined. Industry benchmarks may shape scope inclusions, exclusions. 4. Project files and knowledge repositories. Archived project charters, business cases, and stakeholder registers provide reference points for scope decisions. How can a poor organizational process assets analysis harm the defined scope process? A poor analysis of organizational process assets can significantly harm the defined scope process, leading to inefficiencies, misalignment, and project failures. Here are how the scope definition process can be harmed by a poor analysis of organizational process assets. 1. Incomplete or inaccurate scope definition. You may have missed requirements. Ignoring historical lessons or templates may result in overlooking critical deliverables or constraints. You may have vague boundaries. Without standardized templates, the scope statement may lack clarity, leading to disputes later. 2. Increased risk of scope creep. You may have no historical reference. Failure to review past project change logs or scope issues can lead to repeating mistakes, such as uncontrolled additions. You may have weak change control. If organizational process assets lack clear change management processes, the team may struggle to enforce scope discipline. 3. Inefficient planning and delays. You may be reinventing the wheel. Without leveraging existing WBS templates or guidelines, teams waste time creating scope structures from scratch. You may have approval bottlenecks. Unfamiliarity with organizational approval workflows can delay scope sign-offs. 4. Misalignment with organizational standards. You may have non-compliance. Ignoring regulatory or company policies embedded in organizational process assets may lead to rejected scope proposals. You may have stakeholder conflicts. If past stakeholder preferences, such as documented in organizational process assets, are ignored, new disagreements may arise. 5. Poor risk management. You may have unaddressed past risks. Lessons learned from previous projects highlight risks, such as unrealistic deadlines. Poor analysis means repeating them. You may have resource misallocation. Without historical data, estimates for scope-related efforts, such as time cost, may be inaccurate. In conclusion, organizational process assets are critical because they provide structured knowledge, templates, and historical insights, making the defined scope process more efficient, consistent, and aligned with organizational best practices. Without them, teams risk inconsistencies, overlooked requirements, and scope gaps. Poor organizational process assets analysis undermines the quality, stability, and feasibility of the project scope. By neglecting historical data and organizational standards, teams risk scope creep, rework, and stakeholder dissatisfaction. Always treat organizational process assets as a critical input to define scope. Finishing this video, we will have in the next videos. 1. Creation of WBS for different projects using WBS Schedule Pro. 2. Examples of project plans using MS Project. And many other videos. Don't forget to give a thumbs up if you like this video and want us to continue with new topics. Subscribe to the channel. All content is free. You can also comment suggesting topics you would like to see on this channel. Thank you.